let's get a brief summary of the UFC finances because they had released an SEC filing on Friday. I need to know.
They're doing really good. I mean, really, really good. I can't stress. Let me. I don't want to exaggerate too much, but they're doing really, 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 really good.
I want you to exaggerate. I want to know how good they're doing.
Okay, well, we have their finances came out. They filed with the SEC because of their planned merger with WWE. They have to reveal more information than they did before. Before with Endeavor, they reveal what the segment, the owned sports properties, how they do. And we know the UFC is about 90% of that, so we get a good sense of how well they're doing. But here they're explicitly detailing the finances and financial statements, consolidated statements of the UFC. So we know when Endeavor bought UFC in 2016, the last full year of the Fertittas, they did a record $609 million in revenue. In 2020, they did $891 million in revenue. UFC 2021. They did $1,032 million in revenue. And 2022, it went up to $1,141 million in revenue. So every year it's been going up there. Now, very much guaranteed $1 billion a year in revenue. Their media rights are now last year, their media rights and content was almost $800 million. So they are just rolling in it. And more important for them, their expenses have been basically contained. The expenses aren't growing with them. So like their operating income, which includes fighter pay, was $335 million in 2021 and $325 million in 2022. And remember, fighter pay is just a portion of that. Well, we can go on, expand on fighter pay in a second. But the big one too is their net income. And net income is synonymous with profit. Their net income went from $178 million in 2020 to $273 million in 2021 to $389 million in 2022. 34% margins.
Jesus.
And so $389 million in net income. And that's a lot of money. And it could be higher if they didn't have to pay out so much interest on loans. And part of the loans was the money they gave to the Fertittas to buy the UFC, and the loans are the money they gave basically to Endeavor to keep their business going. So the UFC, not only does it make tons of money, it's paying out a ton of money still to other people.
But not the fighters.
No, well, speaking of the fighters, last year they had an earnings call, and in that earnings call, they detailed how much the fighters made, how much growth we've seen in fighter pay from 2005 to 2021. And I calculated that, and that came out to $178.8 million for fighter pay in 2021. That might not be exact, but based on the figures they gave, that's the amount they should have paid to fighters, which is about 17.5% of revenue in 2021. Interesting enough, they note in this filing that they were able to cut fighter expenses $32.8 million from 2022 to 2021, right? That means in 2022, if my calculation was right about 2021, they paid $146 million to fighters, total pay to fighters, out of $1,140 million, 13% of the revenue.
13%?
13% for compensation. Now, that might not include the other stuff the UFC includes in compensation, like drug testing and the insurance policy and all these other things that they include in the compensation. But that would add about another 1.5% to their pay. So if it's not including that, they went from 13% to 14.5%.
And this down from about 17.5%.
Yes, it's a pretty massive.
Oh my!
It's a pretty massive decrease, especially on a year when the revenue went up $110 million that year from the year before, and the net income, the profits, went up almost $120 million.
And we're in one of the highest inflation cycles ever. Everything is expensive, and they are dropping fighter costs.
But it shows how important the content, the getting rid of the lumpiness is, because last year they didn't do great on pay-per-view. So the higher paid pay-per-view fighters that make a percent on the pay-per-view really don't make a percent. They get a bonus on the pay-per-view. They didn't get as much. So they didn't have to pay as much for those guys. They didn't have as many of them fight. But so the lesser known fighters, where they're collecting this constant guaranteed money, got paid less, and they got. And what's interesting too is that additional revenue, the amount of additional revenue, and so they made 110 million more in revenue, and actually made more in net income. So basically, every additional dollar is above expense. It goes right to profit.